Hello, everyone, and welcome to a very special edition of Fired Up because it's our anniversary. We've been doing Fired Up for a year, and so what we thought we would do is get the whole gang together and talk a little bit about our journey with the podcast, the lessons that we've learned, what's going to come up next. And so I'm joined today by Nicole Patel.
Hey, Morgan. Hey, everybody. Happy 1-year anniversary.
Ian Lipner.
Hey, everybody. Happy podiversary.
Chris Albrick.
Hello. Great to be here as always.
And thanks to you, of course. We've got lots of thanks, actually. I'm going to start there. Thanks to you for listening. And I also want to thank our production team at Galetti Media, Alicia Galetti and Jessica Stanton there, who have done behind the scenes a lot of the audio production. And also to our graphics design team, led by Megan Jordan and Carmen Pacheco. They publish the blogs, but they also make the graphics look great. And so there's a lot of people behind the scenes helping out with this. And this is our chance to thank them for all that they do. And we're going to talk a bit more about how Alicia and her team have really helped us with the launch. But why don't we start by just quickly going around the table? We launched this a year ago. We've come a long way. What have we learned, Nicole?
I think we've all learned a lot. It's hard to believe it's been a year since 4 boxes of audio equipment showed up at my front door. Thank you, Morgan. No, I think we've learned a lot. There's a lot to be said for having this set up in your house and talking to people and just going through the motions every single week of finding guests and researching guests. And the guests do work too, so we want to thank them as well. But I think it's been a learning experience for all of us and probably some humbling moments for all of us as well. Me for sure. But those are some of the biggest learnings. It's a lot more work than you would think goes into it.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I've been impressed with our intrepid host on nearly every episode. The ability to kind of summarize what people are saying and still ask engaged questions while sticking to our program format. It was very difficult on the times where we had to co-host and make sure to do all of those things. It's a hard job to be a host and to keep things moving along and to be, even from an audio point of view, interesting, right? And yeah, I think you do a good job, Morgan. Thank you.
You're very kind. Chris, what have you learned during the last year?
I would echo what Ian and Nicole said, that there's just more to it than you would think. When you're listening to a podcast, it sounds like people sitting around having a conversation, and that's what you strive for. But of course, there are all the technical aspects that you have to deal with. There's just an extraordinary amount of work goes into not banging things. You just have to be aware of yourself in ways that I hadn't anticipated. And I interned at a big radio station, so I'd seen talk shows being produced, and I was always impressed with both the host's ability to keep things moving and the guest's ability to think on their feet. But I would say that throughout this process, I've gained even more appreciation for it, because there really is an art to making it seem as natural as you'd like it to.
I think it's become more conversational over time. When we first did the initial one, we were very lucky with Anthony Shaw, who's the naming expert, to sort of kick it off. I'd probably go back and listen to it and probably cringe more than most of the episodes. But I think we were nervous about starting. And Alicia was great with, look, just press record and go, and it will fall into place. And I think we get more natural over time. And so I think one of the lessons for people considering launching their own is you just have to start somewhere and it will get better over time. But let's just talk a bit about the process. We had, I would say, 3 months or 2 months of planning before we actually launched the trailer episode this time last year. And what were we doing during that time? We were thinking about, okay, can we actually do this? Who are we going to invite? And we created a great list of about 50 guests that we're still working through. Why do we even want to launch a podcast? I think the goals are interesting to consider, Because why are you doing this? Are you trying to build a relationship with the guests? Are you trying to turn this into revenue and leads? It's not a great lead gen mechanism because you've got to build up an audience, right? There are easier ways to generate cold leads from people who don't know you. Are you trying to just drive downloads? Like, what's the measurement of success? So that when you go into it, you sort of know, is this delivering what upon our goals? So we had to think about that. And then we had to think about format a little bit. I think we had some trial recordings and some different, like, okay, which section should we have? And I know, for instance, we've had Fired Up 5, and we had some questions that we pulled out of the bag. I can't even remember what that section was.
A literal bag, mind you, which I wish we had been on video then for Morgan to pull his literal pillowcase out and pull questions out of it. Cracked me up every time.
Which is fun, right? Because it adds a little bit more sort of dynamism to it. But we found that those two sections sort of overlapped a little bit. One was personal and the other was more sort of general about their topic. And at the beginning, we also had a much more topical hook every week. We would try and go through a news item, which I think is good to kind of make it timely. And sometimes we still do that. But at the same time, a lot of people go back through your catalog of episodes. And so with more evergreen content, that keeps it fresh. But if you have a topical podcast, then last week's episode has less value and people don't listen to the back catalog. So in terms of process, we had quite a lot of upfront work in terms of doing the graphics design, thinking about the launch, recording a trailer, and then sort of launching. I think one of the lessons is, if you're thinking about doing this, definitely give it some run up to think about the format and think about whether you've got enough guests. If you're going to do a guest interviewing format, which a lot of B2B podcasts are, do you know enough people?
Right. And the other part of it that you mentioned, just the technical side of it, that really underlines the importance of working with a good producer. Because from what I can tell, so many businesses try to launch a podcast, and I've seen that 50 to 75% of them just get hung up on the technology, on the actual work of production. It's too time consuming. It's too intimidating. And so they never really get their podcast off the ground as a result.
I know one company that they're going to the length, and I guess this is common, of going to a podcast studio and going on site, and they're going to do like 6 episodes at a time, right? And go quarterly in order to just remove all of the production questions from the table, which is a real commitment, because it means, people are stepping out of their business roles in order to do that. Again, they're thinking about what's the best way for them to tell their story. And it isn't by looking at the news each week. It is something that can be like that in longer form.
In our pilot episodes that we recorded ourselves, we very quickly realized we would need to bring in the professionals to help with the audio production. The tools are great. Like, we use Descript. A lot of them can automatically take out ums and ahs and help you chop it down and even produce a video version. But it takes a lot of time. And do you have that time? Even the end product for us was pretty homespun. It didn't represent the brand. We didn't feel like this is a good work product that we wanted to invite some of our closest guests on here, that they would feel proud of the product. There are lots of podcast production companies, and we were lucky to get a referral, and we've been very happy with Elisa and team at Galati Media, who have helped us with the launch and sort of, okay, this is what to expect next, because they've done a few sort of reps of this. And I think they even said, look, most of them, I forget the stat, but 50% of podcasts don't make it past the 10th episode. It's called pod fade. So I think another part of this is you're thinking about it. And I've said this to clients, okay, it's great. Let's do this. Who is going to drive it? Because that person has to want to do it. Or somebody needs to be responsible for making it happen on a regular basis and have the time to do it. It doesn't have to be your CEO or whoever's hosting it, but somebody needs to allocate time to the production and making sure, have we got the guest? Is the guest prepared? What questions are we going to ask? Have we got all the equipment? Have they got the equipment? Who's editing it? Have we got the graphics? Who's publishing the post? Like, all the stuff.
Yeah. Where is it going to be published? I mean, all the platforms.
I think people would be a little surprised, Morgan, that you do so much work on it because you're the CEO. You should be doing CEO things, but you're always thinking about guests and topics and questions. You've really just kept the train moving for the last 52 episodes. It was your idea to do this episode. So, big thank you to you as well. But I think people would be really surprised that a CEO is spending that much time working on a project like this.
Thank you. I mean, I think part of this is one of the ways I learn is by doing. I read about it and then I have to do it. And then in doing it, I sort of learn more about it. And then I can recommend to others and sort of have a genuine insight. And so I think for us as a small company, we need to produce more content. That needs to be led from the front a little bit. We have great other forms of content, but this was a new thing. So it really needed to come from someone in our management team. And frankly, I found that learning about it was quite interesting. I talked about audio production. I tried that and I am terrible at it. So, you think, oh, I can do this. And, no, I'm really bad at it. You learn a lot in the production, as will any other company in sort of moving that through. Let's talk a bit about some of the guests, right? One of our questions was, if it's going to be a guest format, do we know enough people? And we literally thought, well, let's have a list of 50 for the first year that we could invite. And I would say that's been great. A lot of them are people who we know, and the vast majority of them instantly say yes. You feel a bit almost embarrassed about asking, hey, do you want to come on my podcast? But people are honored and they are very happy to volunteer their time. And so I do want to thank all of our guests for coming on and sharing their knowledge. Frankly, what a privilege. You get to meet people who are experts in their area and just ask them all the questions that are top of mind. So I think one of the real benefits for me has been getting the chance to ask brilliant people all about their expertise. And you learn a lot in doing it. In the same way as when you're writing blog posts or any type of content, in teaching others, in sort of condensing your thoughts, you learn a lot.
We just talked about the goal setting. And we talked about how for you and for me, learning hands-on was part of that goal setting. But I didn't realize that we'd be sort of creating a really amazing curriculum for anybody who wanted to learn about what's going on in startup marketing from a how-to-do point of view, right? Like, I honestly expected the guests to come on and be more self-promotional and not sort of open up this is how you do it kind of thing across a lot of things. So many insights that they shared. I think it created the outcome of sort of a little bit of a Firebrand University base if we wanted to, right? We could really cut up that content in the future, but moreover with the learning. That's the goals that I don't think we put that on the top of the list at the beginning from the guests.
That's totally fair. That's it, right. We wanted to go in and ask all the questions like, I can't find this content anywhere else. I'm just going to ask people how to do it. For example, product marketing. I don't know too much about product marketing or brand building necessarily, the process of creating a brand from scratch. And so let's go and ask experts about how they go about that and how they think about it. I might think of an idea in terms of words, but someone who comes from that brand side might think of it in terms of images and pictures. They just have a different perspective. We've also been lucky to have some people pitch us now.
It's very exciting that people come in and pitch to be on Fired Up. Like, that's something that I never expected that to happen. I thought we'd be just using people that we know and people that we work with. But that's been, for me, a big surprise.
They've been great. We've had other PR agencies pitching us with their guests, and I love that because we get to meet new people and it sort of broadens the topics that we might think of. Often they suggest, hey, I have this expert and they can talk to you about this. Oh, this is wonderful. And here are some of their credentials. Of course, like any reporter, I was on Muckrack for a while when I was doing blogging, and we get pitched all the time some terrible stories. And so we do get a few that just don't make, they're not a fit. We're about startup marketing, and, the person they're pitching is not correct for us. But the ones that have, we just spoke to Nihal Bajwa from Neo4j about how that company moved into Gen AI. Great company, directly relevant to all of our listeners and all of our other startups out there. Brilliant. Really good.
I think before we started, we were talking about how we needed to get a good group of folks together that we knew we could launch with, that would represent the kind of guests that would then attract other guests. But I think that in terms of what a takeaway is, when your podcast has reached a certain milestone, when you start getting pitched by public relations folks like us.
Yeah.
Right. And most people are great. And some people have been sort of nervous coming on. Maybe it's their first podcast that they've done. And we have tried to have a flow to say, hey, here are the questions, broadly, the topics that we're going to cover, not prescriptive, because I think it needs to be natural. And also, look, it's not live. It's going to be produced so you can relax. But also, here's the equipment that you need. Because if you don't have a proper microphone, like some of the things they've come on and they haven't had a proper microphone, and you can really hear it, and that affects the whole sort of work product, if you like, the outcome for people. And they want to have a great product too. They want to produce a wonderful episode. And so helping people know this is what to expect. Here's how to prepare. Here's from an audio perspective, you don't do this a lot. Here's what you need, I think has been good. And we built a little workflow there so that, it's automated for us, but it's good for them to give them the information that they need.
I think that's been really helpful. The guests do receive a substantial, totally readable, but a substantial amount of preparatory material, giving them everything they need to know. Not more than they need to know, but nobody's coming in blind. And I think that has really facilitated the conversations over this last year.
And most of the guests, it's a good back and forward. People worry about, hey, they get a guest that doesn't really sort of answer the questions or doesn't really know. And I think we haven't really had that, mainly because obviously we know these people in advance. We have had one, and I'm not going to say who it is, who came on. They were being pitched to us and just sort of had their prepared notes and just went into a great sort of monologue about what they wanted to say. And it was rather hard to interject and have some back and forth, which we much prefer. I almost had to record a bunch of questions after the fact so that we could make it a little bit more interactive. But, you're going to get a few of those. But in general, we've been very lucky with the guests. And so we really do, we treat them well, and we want them, to feel part of it and feel comfortable when they're doing it. One of the challenges with a podcast, though, is promotion, right? How do you discover a new audio podcast? You're sort of listening to it and it's sort of in your ears. And there are a few that you might sort of recommend. Hey, did you listen to Smartless? Or, there's a new one with This Week in Politics with the Mooch and Katty Kay. Like, I got recommended, I listened to it and I like that. But that has to be someone who sort of tells you, right? It's pretty rare for a B2B podcast that someone said, hey, you should listen to this. So what are we thinking about promotion?
I discover podcasts because of smaller, shorter form clips that I see someplace else. And that leads me to that podcast because there's a specific guest or a specific point or a knowledge base that I'm like, oh, I didn't know that there was a podcast on that. But it's not necessarily going to get me to subscribe the first time, right? Like I'll visit it and I'll know that, okay, that exists. It seems to be sort of, oh, wait, they had another good guest. And oh, that's another funny thing they said, or whatever else that then makes me go, okay, I'm going to go ahead and hit subscribe. And I'm guessing that that's sort of how it is for us. I don't know. What do you think, Nicole?
It's really interesting because you're right. Listening to podcasts, it's a very personal thing. You can be very, very picky about it. I know I am. I think what we've learned has been this is a whole new channel that we didn't know about. We know digital marketing inside and out, but if you had asked us a year ago, how do you measure the success of a podcast? How do you promote a podcast? I think it helps us be better marketers for our clients because quite frankly, a lot of our clients, they don't do a podcast. Most people don't do a podcast, or if they start it, they don't stick with it. Certainly not long enough to think about long-term promotion and real marketing efforts towards it. So it's been a really good learning experience for us as marketers to see something else that's out there beyond, email or social or website, all of those channels that we're used to. It's something new and different. It's been fun.
Yeah, and obviously you're promoting it over social. You don't want it to overwhelm your whole channel because a podcast is going to churn out those little audio or videograms that you can have. You can obviously got the post from it. You can pull quotes. So it can turn out a lot of extra content for you. And, you as a startup are not a media company necessarily in that sense. And so it can drown out everything else. Social is a great way to get in front of your audience with your podcast, but it can't be the only thing. So we've been putting it in our emails, obviously in the newsletter, The Forge, for those of you that subscribe, and we recommend that to a lot of our clients too. And I know that some podcasts, every episode, they send out an email blast. I think if people have signed up just for the podcast subscription, that's probably fair. But if I was doing email marketing for a startup that was producing a weekly podcast, you would be overwhelming your email cadence with that. So again, you've got to temper this on social and email. So discovery is definitely a bit of a challenge, but obviously once you've got an audience, these people are very generously giving you half an hour, 45 minutes, an hour of their time whilst they're doing something else. But it's a great honor, and you're getting, if you were to have those people in a room with their attention, that would be very valuable. We have had some prospects say, hey, I listened to your podcast. And so they already sort of know you a little bit when they come into the conversation. And that obviously is great, because we want to work with clients who know it has to be a good fit. There are lots of agencies out there. Culture is important. And we want them to know what it's going to be like to work with us and what we know and where our strengths are, so they know what the relationship is going to be like. And a podcast is a great way to sort of prime that relationship and start it off in a sort of low touch way. So with that then, as we sort of approach this anniversary, we are making some changes to our podcast. And the biggest one is that we are going to go to video first, or at least adding in video for the full episode. And this is a big change. It is one that I think we should all share our enthusiasm about. But it's obviously a big change. But why would you go video first? I think in general for podcasts, this is a trend, and it specifically tackles the discovery element, because if you publish your video on YouTube, obviously it's a big search engine, number 2 search engine, and people can type in, best practices in ABM and likely come up with either the shorts that you produce or a full episode, and then they can engage with you a bit further. Just publishing up, like we have done today, the audio production, which is great, and just a still image on YouTube is another way of consuming it in the background. But it's not engaging, and there are lots of other podcasts out there, so it's not the product that we want to put out. So a big part of our next push is to start video. And what do you think about that, Ian?
I'm feeling trepidatious, Morgan.
It's going to be fine.
Video is hard, and it's a long format, and I'm thinking about how I've formulated answers as we consider, or questions as we've had conversations in the past, and my eyes dart around, and I look a little distracted maybe, or maybe I'm looking down at my notes, imagining me being sort of observable for the entire length is a little stressful. Now, I've media trained a lot of people, but mostly video media training, you're teaching folks to kind of square themselves up and keep their face steady, because even small changes in facial expression can be very distracting, right? So yeah, I hope people aren't going to watch me for 45 minutes straight. Now, Nicole has actual on-camera experience, doesn't have the, face for radio like me.
There's a big difference between sitting in a studio every night and setting this up at home. And certainly when you're thinking about video, there's a lot to think of. There's lighting, there's background, there's all kinds of things when you're not audio first. Is the dog going to run by? Is the cat going to walk in front of the computer? All of those things come into play that you don't have in a TV studio every night. So it's definitely challenging for me as well. And we'll see how it goes. I can't wait to see the blooper reel at the end of the year. So maybe we'll have to put that on YouTube as well, because I bet there's going to be some good ones.
To tack on to what Ian said, the best I can say about it is that the old Greek proverb that suffering teaches. because seeing myself on video has always been agony for me. I have such a resistance to it. And certainly it's been a learning experience watching myself over the course of this year. I didn't realize how much I talk with my eyebrows, how much I roll my eyes when I talk. Ian was saying about how when you train someone to be on camera, one of the things that you will often tell them is to keep your face as steady as possible, speak only with your mouth, keep the rest of your face fairly frozen, right? That is so hard for me. And I didn't even realize how hard it is until I started doing it. And I realized I look like one of the monsters in Where the Wild Things Are. Just rolling their terrible eyes and gnashing their terrible teeth.
Hilarious.
And then this is just me talking, and this is what everybody sees. Right. Oh my God. So it's a real revelation, I suppose, in the interest of constant learning and constant self-improvement. I'm looking forward to this next year teaching me things that I hadn't necessarily planned on learning.
One of the reasons why we sort of started with audio, and even that is quite daunting, right? People are going to be listening to my voice as we talk, and what if I misspeak? And a lot of people are not used to hearing their own voice. So that takes some accommodation. As a next phase, this is also fairly daunting, but the video production will obviously get better over time, and we'll learn about it, and the lighting, and there's some investment, of course, in cameras and lights and things that you can gradually, as you get more signal, you can improve the production. But we feel like now is the right time for this. And it's going to be a thing for our guests too. I've had guests come on and say, okay, I hope this isn't video because, I haven't tied it up behind me. But I do think in terms of discovery, companies need to produce more video. A video podcast is a great way to sort of produce a lot of content and then sort of chop it down and repurpose it onto different channels. And so this is the direction, whether you like it or not, that a lot of podcasts are going. And we are going to be right at the sort of front of that. So please come to Firebrand Comms on YouTube and you will see us in action. And also thanks to you guys for sort of putting yourselves out there a little bit. And I'm hoping it will all be great. As celebration of our anniversary, we also have some giveaways. We've saved it to the end. So we have on firebrand.marketing/store a bunch of fired up swag. There's some stickers, there's a baseball hat, there's a mug, there's some magnets, there's a pint glass even. There's a bunch of stuff for Fired Up fans. And so as another thank you for listening, if you comment on our YouTube channel or give us a shout out on LinkedIn or get in touch with us at firebrand.marketing, we will send you a thanks and a coupon that you can redeem at the store and get some swag. So the first people who reach out to that, once our supplies run out, will stop. But please do comment there, and we'd love to hear from you, which will send you a little token of thanks for that. So that about wraps it up. We want to thank our production team and we want to thank all of our guests. And listen, Ian, Nicole, Chris, thank you for hosting and joining me on this journey. I know we've all learned a lot about the process and I learned a lot from our guests. Really looking forward to another year of this. And finally, thanks to you, our listeners, and we will see you again this time next week.